go to this computer. So Hema, if you could stop your your PowerPoint, I'm gonna put up mine to get things going here. Okay. Share. Screen. Okay, I think everyone is seeing my PowerPoint. Yes? All right. So again, welcome to everyone to our season 8 Environmental Fridays. It is personal. Again, you can take a look at our website either using the URL here, www.theenvironmentalfridays.com, or you can use the QR code in the bottom right. So this month, February, some things of note in terms of the environment. Um, February the 2nd, is that Sunday? February the 2nd?
Yes, it is.
That's a Sunday, yeah. And so it's World Wetlands Day. To find out more information, just Google it and you'll find Wikipedia and many other sources. I've also been emphasizing or um, featuring the fact that we are living through the United Nations decade on ecosystem restoration, 2021 to 2030. So that's what's happening there. To join us on Facebook, just simply go again to Google, put in Environmental Fridays Facebook group, and the first 10 hits, I think, would get you right there. And so we encourage everyone to join Facebook and be actually active on it. If you find information related to the stories and features, news related to the environment, feel free to post it so that we could all learn from it and be aware of what's going on. So the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, has designated that pollution, climate change, and loss of biodiversity are the top threats globally. And so this is something that in Environmental Fridays, we try to feature different aspects of it. In many cases, as you all, would suspect, there is a lot of intersection and overlap between these three uh, threats, global threats. We still have California in our prayers, in our hearts, in our minds. People are still suffering. People are raising funds to help um, renovate or rebuild their homes. So let's keep California and our friends and families and others in our hearts and prayers still. This coming month, which begins here on Saturday, we have 4 exciting guest speakers again. And so our first will be dealing with light pollution, excessive artificial light at night. Then we will learn some more about coral reef ecosystems of the Caribbean, pathways to food justice will be our third episode for February. Poverty and the environment will be our last for February. And we have expert guests that will talk about these topics. A lot to look forward to in February. This is again just our gallery of speakers. So we are now in our second row, end of the first row, second row, these four. So a lot to look forward to. We still do have opportunities for co-hosting. In fact, the first two presentations, the first two episodes next month, we still need co-hosts for those. So if there is anyone, we have some noise in the background. Somebody needs to mute. So if you know of or if you're interested in co-hosting any of these dates, please let me know as soon as possible. So our co-host today is a friend of mine. I'm trying to remember how long. I think I knew about you before I met you. I think we went to the same school, but we were not there together. We went to USC. I went to USC. Oh, Jesus Christ. 75, 78, high school around that time. So I wasn't in college then.
Yes, but I was in high school also in 74, 75.
Ah, okay, okay. So I think I really started knowing about you at Andrews. I
Yes.
think that's it. But I can't remember the number of years either. So
In a while.
been a while. So just to summarize, she has a very, of course, lots of years lived experiences. But Dr. Bridget Hines is a consummate educator. She's instructed K through 12. She has been director of mathematics and science institute at USC, University of Southern Caribbean in Trinidad and Tobago, advisor to the Minister of Education in Guyana, served as United Nations Program Manager for ADRA, which is the Adventist Development Relief Agency. So I'm just kind of picking and choosing stuff here, but it should give you the impression that this woman has been and is living a fulfilled and influential life. She has did her doctoral project at Loma Linda University on health literacy and its role in management of pandemics. She holds degrees from Andrews University in business and education administration leadership. And she is the president of her own company, Charlotte Education Services. So, Dr. Hines, Bridget, could you at least give us 2 minutes about what your company is all about?
Oh, how generous of you. Thank you so much, Dr. Murray. Dr. Murray does not tell you some of my secrets with him. He also guided the final studies of my daughter as she matriculated through Andrews University. And to him, I'll forever be grateful for those moments of mentorship. Um, we organized a band of brothers, I should say, brother and sisters. Our mother was Charlotte, now deceased, our father, Brassington, both teachers for their lives. And so we've established a consortium amongst our siblings to assist around the world. We are pretty international, almost on every continent. And so we meet weekly. And currently, we offer the certificate in special education on the platform of the USC, University of the Southern Caribbean Professional Development Institute. That is just a flagship program. It's been endorsed by Andrews University and been accredited or in the process of accreditation in Guyana, where the headquarters of CARICOM sits. So
So
as a
Charlotte
free
is
one.
like, so Charlotte is in honor of your mom.
Yes,
Because
yes.
I was thinking about it as a place. I was
No,
okay, so all right, that's really good. That's really, really
Charlotte
cool.
is just us coming together. My father died when I was 7 or 8. And this woman, this, I don't know, Amazon woman, uh, sort of raised 6 children single-handedly. And if you visit our website, you'll see the board of governors sort of organized
Put,
around the siblings.
put your link in the chat,
Oh,
sometime
I'd
here
be
so
pleased.
we could, yeah.
Yes, I'd be pleased to. And so, in terms of, that organizational trust, we have no issue there. It's just, the
Mm,
Board of Governors it's a sibling thing.
okay.
Um, but just after that, the lecturers that have been convened are persons that have taught me since CUC, persons that are now my colleagues, and they bring 200 plus years of professional training and experience to
Mm,
the platform. So when you are participating, and we have several cohorts going through in terms of special education, you get the very best
mm.
um, from everywhere. They sit everywhere. They're in several universities.
All
And
right.
so we've assembled as maybe retirees, not all of them at that age yet,
Mhm.
and we give of our best. So Charlotte Education Services Consortium, we not only do special education, but if you go on the website, you'll see all the services that we offer.
Mm.
So it's a pleasure being here, and thank you so much.
Right. So now it's your turn to introduce our speaker for today.
And what a pleasure. I've heard her voice, and sometimes it's the mere intonation of someone's voice that invites you into their space, into their aura. And so I have had the privilege and pleasure of meeting Dr. Hema Baboolal today, and already I am part of her fan base. Who is she, though? Let me just cull a little from her bio. She is an environmental scientist from South Trinidad. That's my second home. I spent almost 10 years in Trinidad and has spent her entire career in cross-discipline environmental research. She attended the Irie High School and Siparia Senior Comprehensive High School and holds 2 Bachelor of Science degrees. And her doctorate was from the British Council University of Strathclyde International Scholarship. She got that to do her MSc. She has interned at the Institute of Marine Affairs after graduating with her first degree and became a research officer. This over the years, she has undertaken projects that span aspects of the environmental spheres, air, land, and aquatic perspective. She's now the lead consultant at her university startup company, Air Science TT, and the lecturer at the University of the West Indies in the Faculty of Sciences and Technology. Air quality has been identified as one of the most significant environmental threats with implications for public health. And that's what touches me so much since I'm a public health professional. And it's the root cause for the global climate shifts due to upset with the Earth's heat balance, et cetera, et cetera. We'll hear about all of this today. It is with delight that I present to you Dr. Hema Baboolal. And I, like you, am eager to hear her. Dr. Baboolal, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Well, welcome everyone and happy Friday. Today's Environmental Friday talk is on Sahara dust. So it's a general talk, and at the end of it, I would welcome any questions or, let's have a discussion about it because Sahara dust gets everywhere, affects everyone. The dust that comes off the Sahara, incidentally, is provides the largest global loading of dust in the planet. Between 60 to 90% of the dust that we have circulating around the globe comes from this region, from the Sahara and Sahel region of Northern Africa. So to get along, some of the impacts that Sahara dust has are that they're not all bad. Some of them include good things. They bring nutrients, phosphorus and iron across the Atlantic, rain over the Amazon area, and supply nutrients for the Amazon forest. They also set the patterns for rainfall and for some of the climate that happens in North Africa are affected by the processes that are directed and impacted by what goes on with the Sahara dust. One of the things that happens is the Sahara dust has an impact on Atlantic cyclogenesis. That is how hurricanes form and affect the Caribbean region. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So let's start what happens to explain what happens in Northern Africa. The Sahara is a massive desert which occupies a large part of the Northern African continent. But during the months of October to about March, there are these harmattan winds, which are these hot, dry winds that blow from the northeast, and they blow over the mountains, over the Atlas Mountains. And the formation is such that it forms like a wind tunnel. So you have often very high-speed winds forming in that area and blowing towards the west. They're very hot, they're very dry, and often this can pick up some of the dry material and the dust from the Sahara Desert area. Within the Sahara Desert, there's also the Baboolal Depression. Now, about 7,000 years ago, the Baboolal Depression was one of the biggest lakes on the planet. And how times have changed, because now that Baboolal region contributes about 50% of the net Sahara dust that gets emitted from that Saharan area, which is quite interesting. Because one of the things we would come back to is that the world is cyclic, and changes in one part of the globe often has corresponding consequences in another part of the world. So this aspect of climate change is happening. It happened before on a different time scale and a different rate, of course, but the world has not always looked the way it does now. As far as we are concerned, we wanted to know when we saw this phenomenon that was occurring. It's very hard to see the phenomenon of the Sahara dust moving across the Atlantic, actually moving in any direction, if you don't view it from satellite imagery. It's the only thing that gives it the scale, that can give a perspective on scale. There are many instances where people measure particulate loading at different countries and different places. But for the most part, a large part of the Saharan desert is not monitored in that way. So the way we see the Sahara dust comes from the images that we get back from space. And it allows us to analyze quite a lot of things. One of the things that was analyzed in situ, this was samples that were collected at different points along the Saharan area, were what that dust is made up of. What is the chemical composition of that dust? Is anything harmful coming across in that dust? What was found was that near the source of the Sahara Desert, the heavier particles. So we're talking about particulates that are 10 microns in aerodynamic diameter or larger. They tend to be hover around near to the source. And as with gravity, the heavier particles would tend to fall off faster. The lighter particles, however, can get wafted up in those into the harmattan winds and get carried into the jet stream, which is a polar jet stream that can go in different directions. One of them is Saharan area. Bring Saharan dust from the Saharan region westerly over the entire southern Caribbean. And that's just one jet stream. There are times when there's cyclonic activity over the northern part of Africa, and you can have jet streams heading towards the Arctic. So Sahara dust can get into the Arctic, and you can find this by when you see layers of that characteristically red dust layering over the white snow. So the thing that they've found with the chemical composition of the Saharan dust is that the heavier particles tend to be the ones that have most of the residues from pesticides, the polychlorinated biphenyls, the polyaromatic hydrocarbons from incineration products, from fossil fuels, for example, or from bushfires in the Sahel area. And those particles tend to remain closer to the North African landmass. What comes across are the lighter particles, like the PM 2.5. That's particles that are less than 2.5 microns in size. And those come across on the jet stream, and they don't have as many chemical contaminants. For the most part, I mentioned that a lot, 50% of the dust from the Sahara is from the Baboolal area, and the Baboolal area being an old lake, a lot of the dust that comes from there are actually silicates, which are from the diatoms that live there and were layered. Those particles, so the dust, the mineral dust that comes across as Sahara dust is a mixture of many different things. It's iron-rich silicate deposits, as well as some carbonaceous deposits from this calcareous material, from the shells of these diatoms. And there we are. So the Sahara dust isn't occurring all the time. It used to be that during the Harmattan period is when you had the most amount of dust being carried, when you had the most amount of those local winds coming down the mountains and bringing that hot air that was able to waft the dust up into the jet stream. Because of climate change, however, and because it's hotter and drier, when it is hot and dry, sometimes this can happen throughout the year. So you always can have some periods of wafting of this dust up into the jet stream. And sub-Sahara dust has its peak season between October and March, yes, but it also has episodes of high dust being wafted across the Atlantic region throughout the year. One of the positive effects of Sahara dust is the fact that because of this silicaceous nature, it tends to be this light colored material. It's not a dark dust, so it doesn't absorb heat. And it has a small albedo effect, so it can reduce the surface temperature. During the high season, when there is a lot of Sahara dust, the plume actually shields heat, so it keeps the temperatures down. And for the Southern Caribbean, where the Sahara air layer passes, for the hurricane season, that's August to November, when there is dust in the air at that point in time, it causes a shift. And this is from calculations interrelating dust levels at any given time with the tropical cyclone path of the different hurricanes that they formed over the years. And it does seem that when there is particular loading from the Saharan sources over the Southern Caribbean, the hurricanes that form over the Atlantic tend to veer further north than they normally would. And when this happens, landfall at where there are greater land masses like the North American continent tends to be more frequent. And therefore, the possible catastrophic consequences of those hurricanes increases because there's simply more land and more people living there than there are in the Caribbean. I mean, it's lucky for the Caribbean that it has its impacts, but it balances off in that that misfortune is transferred to another set of people in another landmass. So stats on Sahara, roughly between 60 and 200 million tons of dust is carried across the Atlantic annually. analysis of this was done in 2030 for 2007 to 2013, and the estimated average was about 182 meters. So it was within the range that was stipulated. That this is the amount of dust that moves off every year from the African continent that get lost and dispersed over the land masses of the Atlantic and the southern South America, North America, as well as large parts of Europe. Incidentally, the lighter dust that gets transmitted furthest seems to be smaller than we have now. For the most part, anything smaller than 2.5 is what you would find in Sahara dust. There was a study in Romania that captured some of the Sahara dust during an episode in 2022, I believe. And the fraction that they selected, the largest fraction that they got was PM 1.5. This is important to know because PM 2.5 is deemed biologically active simply because PM 10 and PM 2.5 are usually two parameters that you measure as criteria pollutants. In most speeds, most standard measurements of air quality include those two. PM 10 is important because particles that have an aerodynamic diameter smaller than 10 microns have the ability to be inhaled. And our nose hairs and our mucus lining on our pharynx do not shield us from that. However, the smaller the particle, the smaller the aerodynamic diameter of those particles that are inhaled, the deeper it is able to penetrate into the lung tissue. And the deeper it is able to penetrate, the longer its residence time there. And therefore, the more and the longer the interference it has on that gas exchange surface and the processes that our lungs were adapted for, that we evolved lungs to function as, and they're very efficient at doing that. And that is how they affect the health of a person. Anything that affects the lungs and breathing capacity and the capacity for gas exchange also puts strain on the heart. So the two are connected. So Sahara dust has health impacts on those two things. People that are affected with cardiovascular disease and people who have compromised lung functions. It can also induce some negative effects, health effects on people that are exposed to high levels of dust. Moving on, there are numerous research links, numerous research publications that have been done to demonstrate what the effects are of this large loading of dust. The Sahara dust, the dust coming off of the Sahel and the Baboolal area, we call it a natural pollutant. We call it a natural pollutant mainly because there's very little one state or one country can do to stop the phenomenon. It happens on a global scale, on a global level process, where localized winds create an effect that wafts dust up to the polar stratospheric jet streams that transmit this dust in all directions, in Australia, throughout Europe, throughout Asia, and throughout the Caribbean, even North America. From the advisories that we get from our local health, Ministry of Health, the symptoms to note are dry cough, sore throat, itchy and watery eyes, sneezing, and a runny nose. When we started, at the very first slide, the introductory slide, I had a picture of a guy wearing apparel typical of dry, dusty areas, the long coat and the wrap around the face. And Bridget was asking me about if I was going to talk about the way people dress and if that's an adaptation to the environment that they live. And I told her that I would be curious to know if that is the reason that all that is worn. I would imagine it is, because dust is intrusive. It can irritate your eyes, it irritates your nose, it doesn't do very well if it gets into your lungs. It can get you will have flu-like symptoms because your body is going to react to foreign material in your body. Sometimes in like an allergic reaction, it's going to produce mucus and you're going to have symptoms like a flu. So if anyone is on this call and can add some wisdom, please do. I've included here some studies, an indication of the fact that studies have been done with varying degrees of establishment of linkages between levels of exposure of Sahara dust and a health outcome. And they include areas as far as Australia, the Himalayas, Taiwan, British Columbia, Canada, and the Caribbean. What we found in the Caribbean is that the Sahara dust that comes in, there is a season, and it's typically worse during the transition months. The seasonality pattern for Trinidad and Tobago is that usually the first half of the year, the first 6 months, is dry season, and from May to November, December is the wet season. Lucky for us, the wet season coincides, has an overlap with the high dust period. So one of the things that removes the dust from air is rainfall. And because we have a wet season and there is periodic rainfall, it rains out some of the dust. So they would have one day, today would be hazy and dusty, and you'd see that that stereotypical red haze. If you look out to the distance, but we know it's a hazy day, it's a Sahara dust day. And one episode of rain, heavy rainfall, and the place looks washed and clean and bright because of that, because the rainfall removes the dust. This plot is what's the incidence. So two organizations collect data on dust. The Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Office takes a note of using a visibility index of yes or no. If there's a visibility of above a certain range, then there's not a dust day. And if there is haze and visibility is reduced to below that range, I think below 15 kilometers, then it's noted as a dust day. And over the last 5 years, I've plotted here the dust days per month from 2019 to 2024, that there does seem to be any change in the numbers. The pattern seems to be consistently that during the dry season, that's the first 6 months of the year, dust levels tend to be higher. And during the second part of the year, dust levels tend to be lower. That's August to December. Also happens to coincide with the period of the hurricane period. So it does show the peak of the Hamilton winds when those periods are active. And incidentally, it takes about 5 days for dust to move across the Saharan air layer, that jet stream, from the Saharan desert to the Caribbean region. So it's very quick. It doesn't take very long at all.
Yeah.
The health implications, they include reduced lung surface for gas exchange. It does not seem to be a significant source. The PM2.5 that get here, the lighter particles, they don't seem to be a significant source of the polychlorinated biphenyls or much of the fossil fuel residues. A more important source of these are more local land use. So in Trinidad and Tobago, which tends to be more on the industrialized side, the local dust, the PM2.5 measured here, tends to come from Sahara dust, yes, but also from exhaust fumes, from factory incineration products, from emissions from different manufacturing sectors, and from incineration of fossil fuel. So it's that added on. Emissions from diesel engines, for example, they all tend to be the most harmful because it's a high combustion engine for diesel, and that generates the finest particles. And as I mentioned, the finer the dust, the deeper it gets into the lungs, and the longer the residence time. And the longer the residence time, then the chemistry of that dust that's sticking in the lungs for a long time becomes more important. So high levels of Sahara dust can exacerbate illness associated with allergies like rhinitis and flu-like symptoms, chronic pulmonary disease, COPD, and people who have pre-existing conditions like pulmonary cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, tend to be most affected. Children are one of the more, just like the elderly, are among the more vulnerable. Children, their lung capacity is higher to their body volume ratio. So they tend to feel the effects more, the negative effects more of this compromised lung gas exchange surface than older people would. There's also emerging evidence that the physical presence of particulate material that stimulates an allergic reaction in the lung tissue and changes the electrical balance. So it causes some oxidative stress in the tissue, localized lung tissue, can also lead to some forms of lung cancer in non-smoking population. So there is also that. The current projections are not too optimistic. The UN predicted that there may be increased frequency and severity of dust storms due to climate change, hotter and drier. There's land degradation. This has continued. Despite many efforts to curb, it still continues to be a problem. We expect the hotter temperatures and the decrease of wintertime cold air surge activity of the Sahara Desert likely to cause increase of these perturbances that cause dust to be wafted up into the jet stream and be brought across into the Caribbean region. So we would expect in the Caribbean area to have increased asthma attacks in children and a possible incidence of meningococcal meningitis and cancer. Also because the dust doesn't come across sterile, it does come across with some microbial populations with it. There are some things we can do, but they're not on a state level, they are on an individual level. The steps that we can take to protect ourselves. If we know that we're part of the vulnerable population, then when we are given advisories, as many countries have for dust days, that we, adhere to them. And as much as possible, limit outdoor activity. I've seen many people running near to roadways, and this is a great disservice. Breathing in all that exhaust fumes and all the emission gases is actually worse. And the benefit that you would try to give yourself by exercising is almost obliterated by what you're inhaling into your lungs. So as much as possible, stay away from the outdoor environment that you can do very little about when there are high dust days, and stay away from busy roadways as much as possible, where that is possible. In countries that have high dust loading, either from local sources or from whatever source, particulate materials, just like during COVID, we learned that wearing a mask can protect us a little bit. Wearing a mask does even better at protecting us from dust. So there is absolutely no shame, no harm. It is actually good, you protecting yourself. When you choose to wear a mask on days when it has a high particulate loading in the air. An advisory from our local Ministry of Health is that while persons may experience symptoms during the days of a Saharan dust event, these symptoms should alleviate as the dust levels decrease, because the Sahara dust, even though it's periodic, it is sporadic and it does have a peak and curve. And the symptoms should respond to those times when the dust levels are lower. If it does not, and there's persistent fever or there is a worsening of a pre-existing condition, then those persons should seek medical care. So speaking of things that happen with climate change, one of the things we saw last year was that there was a lot of rain. Now, I mentioned to you that the Baboolal area in the Saharan Desert, 7,000 years ago, used to be had one of the biggest lakes on the planet, Mega Chad, that was at the foothills of the Atlas Mountains. The thing is that it's quite ironic that even though it's generally climate change is bringing hotter, drier, more extreme conditions, maybe this is an extreme condition. The rainfall last year between August and November in the Saharan area, the typically dry area on the Eastern Sahara, was very wet. So there were headlines on the news that there was flooding in the Sahara. And flooding in Sahara doesn't necessarily mean a good thing always, because when the soil is unconsolidated, when water flows over it, it forms like a hard pan, and the water is not able to penetrate into that soil despite the dryness of that soil. And the result is that you have a slurry being formed, a movement of that water rapidly over the surface that can have destructive forces. So it's causing rain isn't always a good thing. It's how the soil would respond to that rain. Nevertheless, that rain in pockets where it could be held in one place did allow vegetation to grow. So through satellite imagery as well, NASA reproduced some images and posted it on their website, and I put the website down at the bottom of the page, that there was a noticeable increase in greening of the area that is typically brown from the satellite imagery because of the amount of rainfall in that area. There's also this movement in the last decade or so, a collaborative effort, and you know that this has to be a really committed effort under the UNDP, the Jeff facility, and working with these countries, these 11 countries that span from the west to the east coast of Africa, to rehabilitate the Sahel soils, that's the border of the Sahara Desert, the southern border, such that it is able to hold on to that water. So when precipitation comes, the project is called the Great Green Wall. You can Google it, and I've put a link there. But what they've done is over a 15-kilometer bandwidth, been able to, through an ancient method of making these semicircular formations, digging a semicircular pool, more or less, so that when there is water and it passes over the surface, it has to collect in these small pockets, these small half miles, they're called, across the landmass. And in doing that, the water slows down a bit and gets a little bit of chance to percolate. And where there is water, there is life. So when the water has been percolating, and there's some projects, some people, countries started this initiative back in 2008, and some joined on later. But what has happened is that there is now a great green belt on the southern periphery of the loose boundary of the Sahara Desert. And it is a massive undertaking and a massive effort to try to prevent or slow down the expansion of the Sahara Desert southwards. Because people live in these countries and they depend on the integrity of the environment. So they are willing and able, and they profit from an increased health in the environment that they're in. So when there is green, when there is water, that means they have food, they can sustain cattle, they get fed better, their children can eat better, their children can live in a certain one place, have a chance to have a life and an education and some stability. And their lives are better when there is more water and the environment is healthier. So this is a beautiful project capitalizing on indigenous knowledge to be able to gradually cultivate local plants that are well suited to the environment that they're in, to create structures that allow water to not erode and pass over and flood everything that goes over, not be a destructive force, but a force of growth and building. And they've succeeded. It's a beautiful thing to see. I encourage you to go online and check it out and support the effort and think how you can do this in your own place, how you can do what you do, put any effort you can to conserve water. As the earth goes, from an environmental scientist, I can tell you, as the earth is changing, as there is that gradual global warming, then you have more volatilization of water. We have less than 3.5% of fresh water that sustains life on the planet in all our rivers, in all our glaciers. It's about 3.5%. About 60% of that is frozen in ice. I mean, that may though a bit, but it means that we have less than 1% of fresh water that sustains life as we know it. As the earth gets hotter, as rainwater, clean, fresh water will become a very valuable commodity. So things like rainwater harvesting, using products that will not pollute, that will easily break down through microbial digestion, through natural pathways, are a very viable and self-sustaining method is what we can do to contribute to general sustainable development on our planet and not pollute, not continue to be a force of detriment, but a force of growth. And that's the end of my talk for today. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so very much. Thank you much. So
Absolutely.
so you want to get started, Bridget, on
Yes, I just want to
questions
jump
and
off.
invite the
First of all, I
audience
just
as
want
well?
to thank Dr. Hema for her presentation, and then to compliment her on that beautiful green wall. I just love that countries have come together and are harnessing what could be a natural disaster, as it were. Would you say to me then, and I understand that the individual countries cannot work on their own in the Caribbean, is there any thought towards addressing the Saharan dust as a region in the Caribbean?
I would say not really, other than because as a state, as each individual state, so even collectively, the scale of this occurrence, of this phenomenon, of the movement of Sahara dust, of 182 million tons of dust moving across the Atlantic, is not something any country has any control over. Prevention is better than cure, but the world has always been changing. There are different zones of precipitation, different zones of drying, and possibly that's changing as well with climate change. But the actions taken to prevent harm to people, public health, have been advisories by the various ministries of health to go forward for individuals to know their vulnerability and to protect themselves by staying indoors or wearing masks as necessary. Unfortunately.
Thank you so very kindly. I see Doctors Archer and Oregio hands up. Please go ahead, Dr. Archer.
Hi, good morning.
Good
Very,
morning.
very much. And a really very good presentation. I'm curious, I missed some of your presentation, distracted a little bit by other things going on around here. And I don't know whether you addressed this, but have we seen any microbial migration, transferred as a result of the Sahara dust or in the Sahara dust? In this day of novel diseases, you kind of wonder about that possibility at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So one of the things to piggyback on the Sahara dust are microbes. These are resilient. They can have spores, and they have come across a lot of Aspergillus species and a few other species that over the last 20 years or so, they've found some links with some of the those piggybacking bacteria and fungus that come across, causing disease on corals. They've been coming across, those microbes have been hitching a ride, and Sahara dust have been coming across for quite a while. So many of those microbes that come across are also have resident populations here in our soil. Aspergillus is a very common bacterial species. So pathogenicity so far has, as far as the investigation and as far as the science goes, I believe has been some of the coral diseases that we've seen. Maybe more emerging are those microbes that are being thawed out in the glaciers that are being thawed out. Those ice sheets and masses glaciers have been frozen for longer than humanoid species have existed, some of them. And therefore our immune system, our bodies are not in any way, shape, or form accustomed to any of those. So those would be alien. And we don't know about the pathogenicity of some of the things that are being thawed from those melting ice caps.
Wow.
May have its positives, but certainly great negatives in terms of introducing possibly new DNA material into the environment, plants and animals and so on. But of course, the risk of the emerging diseases in humans and other animals is really something we need to monitor very closely.
Yes, zoonotics are being looked at as, after COVID, this seemed to be what's been happening, different iterations of the bird flu.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Trevor?
Yeah, a follow-up question where Dr. Bridget Hines. Now she asked a question about whether the Caribbean countries are doing anything. Are the Caribbean countries aware of this phenomena that's taking place? I mean, is this knowledge known to these countries and the impact that they could have on their environment, on their people? That's question number one. And another quick question is that in that Great Green Wall, in those 11 countries, some of these countries are involved in wars, very devastating wars that are taking place, especially in Sudan, South Sudan and Sudan. And I'm wondering if these kinds of human activities like war, is it affecting the way how this Great Green Wall is evolving in these countries?
So answer your first question. I think many countries in the Caribbean are aware because I do see many of the individual countries, their health ministries put out advisories. We do monitor for dust in the Caribbean, and they do put out the advisories to say people who are vulnerable, please take precautions to protect yourself. Trinidad being one of them. I see Barbados does the same thing. Barbados, incidentally, has one of the oldest air quality monitoring stations in the Western Hemisphere. And for our area, that air quality station is used as the ground truthing for a lot of satellite imagery for our region. So they are aware. I think they're also aware that there's not very much they can do as a state to protect the population from it, other than to tell them to take preemptive measures on an individual basis. Your second question about war. Of course, war is unfortunate. But the amazing thing about cooperation among these 11 countries who are otherwise at war and have many social problems is that they have signed treaties with each other and with their funding agencies to continue this effort. So despite the conflicts that exist, there are still levels of cooperation where there is shared benefit from the people having food to eat or having access to water. That is seemed as important enough to put aside at least some of the time to be able to cooperate and achieve this Great Green Wall. That's why I think it's so amazing, because it is possible. War, in my opinion, is unnecessary. But each country has its own policies, has its own social structure, has its own conflicts. That aside, the environmental issues have no regard for people's politics or feelings or health status.
That's right. Okay, other comments, questions? I have one question from one of our regular audience members, but she is not able to be with us today. She's also from Trinidad, Pat McGraw. So she's wondering, just like this effort with the Great Green Wall, are they also contemplating using some part of the Sahara or surrounding areas to build like banks of solar panels, using it for, to help with energy? Are you aware of any of that happening?
I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are numerous efforts to do that, because that's necessary. The world does have to have. There are two aspects. So global warming is because of the amount of fossil fuel that we consume, that we incinerate, put emissions into the air, put greenhouse gases into the air, change the heat balance. The two ways we can fix that, one is converting away, using alternative sources of energy other than fossil fuels. So that's alternative sources. Solar is one of them. The second one is changing consumption patterns. Because one of the reasons we consume so much solar energy, so much fossil fuel, is because we are making products to drive our population, to feed that explore, utilize, waste, throw away, buy more type of linear consumption pattern.
Mhm.
So those two things have to work in tandem. We have to do something about the way we consume resources and use them and how we throw them away and how we recycle, as well as not utilize as much fossil fuels and employ alternative sources of energy as much as possible. So I know that I'm aware that there are oil and gas products, and it does seem that the oil and gas sector has taken a lead role in a lot of the climate change talks. In doing that, they have made themselves more or less like a regulator in the process of policy. And it does seem to be evolving that oil and gas is not going to go anywhere. And some of the companies have also committed to, while we will get every drop we can of fossil fuel, we're also going to explore other sources of energy because we are well aware that this is a limited resource and we cannot put all our eggs in one basket, and we will look to the future.
Mhm.
So I'm sure that there are very many projects going on because there's a lot of funding for alternative sources of energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very interesting questions in the chat.
Yeah. So does Hadassah want to unmute and ask her questions? I think to some degree it was answered where the dust came from, but it's okay to re-emphasize that. Hadassah? Well, one of the questions that Hadassah has, where are these, where's the dust created from? I think there was a lake that you referred to. Could you go over that again?
Yes. So the Sahara Desert is about, let me see if I can find that slide. Oh, can't. So the Sahara Desert is actually a large part of the Northern African continent. And within that Northern African continent, there's the Baboolal region near Chad. And that Baboolal area used to be about 7,000 years ago, from the geological structures and from what geologists have said, it used to be a lake. And it seems to have been one of the largest lakes at that point in time. But the earth has changed, precipitation has changed, land masses have moved around the globe. And so seasonality and formations have all been altered in that space of time. So what was previously a large lake that probably had, where there's water, there's life, previously had thriving life forms, is now a dry, dusty area. And the prevailing weather patterns in that area are those hot, dry air coming off the Atlas Mountains and forming these funnels that can waft now the dry dust, Saharan dust into the air. And that takes it up to the jet streams, to the stratospheric area, which is where lighter particles get wafted, transported in the jet streams to all over the world, to the Arctic, depending on how strong, how violent that uplift is.
Okay. So is it true to say that part of what impacts at least the biological impact of Sahara dust is the size and the composition, right? The size of the particles and what they are composed of, including what Len was talking about, bacteria and stuff taking a ride on them.
Yes. Most importantly, is the dust, the size of it, that biologically active PM 2.5, and the sheer presence of those silicates on tissue, causing your body to react to a foreign object that induces some symptoms in even healthy people.
Yeah, I was glad to see that you also had at least a couple of slides in talking about the incidence of asthma and other respiratory diseases and the links with Sahara dust. Could you tell us a little bit more? For example, do you know whether there's an increase in the Caribbean, increase in the affected areas? What do studies show about that linkage?
Well, it does seem from the literature, it's at least from a paper I read from 2022 in the Lancet, that the expectation is that the incidence of Sahara dust will rise. That Sahara dust, those dust days when we have high particulate loading, and I'm talking about normally Trinidad, sometimes the fine particulates can range from 15 to 45 on a normal day.
Hmm.
You have dust loading dust days. It can go up to 100, 120 micrograms per cubic meter of PM 2.5. It can be quite a lot.
Wow.
And if the hotter the earth gets and the more extreme the temperatures can get, then you would have those incidences of very high convective currents wafting dust from a dry area that it's because of its geographic location, doesn't get a lot of precipitation in the first place. So it's probably going to stay dry for at least most of our lifetime, and maybe most of our grandchildren's lifetimes. So it will continue to provide the geological formation that allow the process to take place to put fine dust into the atmosphere and spread it across the globe, including across the Caribbean on the Saharan area.
Mhm.
So the incidences of people reacting to dust due to the increased number of dust days is quite realistic. That is actually the prediction.
Yeah. You know, it's something curious is that growing up in Trinidad, I really was unaware of Sahara dust. And I don't know if that's true for others. I mean, honestly, being very transparent, it's only in the last 10 years or so that I have like Sahara dust has come to my consciousness. Growing up in Trinidad, you know, I didn't know that we experienced it. I didn't hear anybody talking about it. Is that something that others, are aware of or share that type experience? I mean, did you, Hema, like know about it, experience it growing up?
Yeah, I would say from high school, I was aware of Sahara dust and the phenomenon.
Okay, okay. I wasn't. I'm just being honest.
In primary school, no, but nothing was a problem in primary school.
Okay.
But when we did geography in high school, I think we started looking at the issue because I think as we were able to see scale, in 20, 30 years ago, nobody in Trinidad was measuring air quality or
Mhm.
measuring dust levels. But as satellite imagery became available, widely available, accessible to the public, popping up on news, popping up on CNN, that has a lot of dust today, or something like that, it came into consciousness. And I guess once it enters your consciousness, it's hard to ignore. And we live in the information age, so I know this is NGO that I'm part of, Earth Medic Earth Nurse, and the head of it is a previous head of CAFA. So he's a medical doctor by training and a public health professional, and he lives in the mountains, in off Port of Spain.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And he says he has horrible problems with allergies. So he says his nose will tell him when we have a dust day. He doesn't need the Trinidad and Tobago Met Office to announce that we have a dust day. And if he can look, like if you look over Port of Spain and if he can see San Fernando, he knows that we're good. But if he can look over Port of Spain and he can't see anything past Port of Spain, he knows we're really bad.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but behind it is another question that I think Hadassah is touching on. Again, like it sounds from what you're saying that Sahara dust has been around for ages, for hundreds of years. It's just a natural phenomenon. Is that a correct statement?
It seems to have been happening for a very long time. It seems to have accelerated in the 70s, 80s, 90s.
Okay, okay.
It does seem to have increased.
I see.
And the projection is for that to continue, that trend to continue as the earth gets hotter and drier.
Okay, okay.
So, Dr. Baboolal, is there any opportunity for research? Let's say students, Dr. Archer at the University of the Southern Caribbean, uh, at this, collaborate in a collaborative way. Is there any opportunity for USC students to collaborate with you, ma'am, at the University of the West Indies on this point that we all share, that of the Sahara dust.
Mm-hmm.
There are always opportunities. Always opportunities for research. The university actually pioneered a lot of the research in looking at profiling the chemical contaminants, collaborating with global efforts to profile the chemical contaminants and chemical composition of the Sahara dust, as well as to figure out if there had any pollutants in it that came across. This was a project that was ongoing since the 90s, since I was doing a bachelor's here, I believe. They had collection sites in Signal Hill, in Toko, and active collection for that project has finished, but there is, with funding, this project can continue, this kind of continuous monitoring can continue. But now most of the air quality monitoring is taken over by our regulatory agency, the Trans Tobago Environmental Management Authority, and they regularly put out daily, they put out air quality indices indicating what parameters are high, and they give warnings as well for any particular loading episodes to expect and currents.
Well, you're speaking to the right person there. Len is the provost. So any sort of research collaborations would probably go through him, right, Len?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that my
Sorry, go ahead.
my last news awareness about the Sahara Desert was that it was expanding. So I feel very positive that about the projects you have described, which seem to be succeeding in reducing the expansion. Is that a correct understanding of what's happening or what has happened?
I think that is the objective, and I think they're putting up a valiant effort. It's a decade old, and this is a zone, as Dr. Murray was saying, this is a zone that's full of conflict. So you never know what can happen in the future, but so far it's a collaboration that's held. People have signed up and stuck to the cause, and they've kept at it. So we will see. We could hope. And humans can be amazing, amazingly, surprisingly hopeful. So it would be amazing if this worked and was able to regenerate a large part, rehabilitate a large part of the Sahara Desert. But for now, it's limited to the Sahel region, which typically does get some amount of rainfall and does sustain a significant population that depend on agriculture.
Okay, that's positive.
Len?
Okay. Yes. Okay. Well, one, in answer to your question, I'd be happy to engage Dr. Baboolal with our science department and see what areas of collaboration there could possibly be. Student involvement in research projects and that kind of a thing. Yes, I'd be happy to do that. And the other, I wanted to raise, really a comment to that. I read a report recently of a significant portion of desert in China that is being rehabilitated.
Hmm.
And it's like you say, it's hopeful that we see the same thing in Africa. Obviously, the resources significantly different in some of those territories. Resources that China has to be involved in that kind of a rehabilitation effort is certainly not the same that many of those bordering states of the Sahara experience. So that's a challenge for the world community. I think we can find a way to do some of that, along with the local people, of course.
Yeah, I would definitely want to have a guest speaker come in and focus on the Great Green Wall. So if anybody, including you, Hema, has like connections, I mean, I could look online, but if you have connections to people who would do a good job there on that, please let us know, because it sounds like a really important project, exciting, hopeful, as several have said. And so it's something that we would definitely want to feature on Environmental Fridays.
I will do some homework and see if I can find for you.
All right, sounds good. So another question I have, because you did mention something about the pollution that in Trinidad specifically, I think you were mentioning, that comes from vehicles, diesel engines and stuff. My sense is, so for example, going from traveling from Berrien Springs to Chicago over the last 20 years or so, is that the diesel pollution has been significantly reduced. That nasty smelling fumes from diesel engines, the smokestack that's come from them. So I'm just wondering if this is something that has also been true in Trinidad. Is there any efforts to use engines and all of that pollute less? Because it's possible. I mean, I think
And it is possible.
yeah.
It is possible. I can tell you from personal experience that the diesel that we have in Trinidad that's available, I mean, diesel is a consortium of lots of different compounds of just a certain range of molecular weight of hydrocarbon. And in Trinidad, we have dirty diesel. It's called dirty diesel. Means it has particular loading. It has a different color from what the diesel that you would buy in Europe is very different from what you would get in the gas stations in Trinidad. I used to have a Volkswagen, and I wanted to buy a Volkswagen pickup, a diesel pickup, because diesel is expensive compared to premium gasoline.
Right.
And everybody told me, don't do that. It will mess up your engine. It's not, those engines, European-made vehicles, are not designed to handle our grade of diesel.
Okay.
So
I didn't know that there were different grades in different countries. So that's one aspect, maybe, that in the US they've regulated the type of diesel. And maybe also in addition to that, how it's processed, right? How it may have specific types of filters or whatever built in to the vehicles now. Yeah, it's something to look into. So at least we could, control what we could. We can't control the Sahara dust. So we have to try to do what we could with what we have control over.
Man, I have another question.
Uh-huh.
So I was wondering if the impact of the Sahara dust on the Caribbean is uneven. In other words, there are countries in the Southern Caribbean that are closer, I suppose, to the winds coming from Africa. Are they affected more adversely than, say, countries like Jamaica that is more in the Northern Caribbean? Are there any studies to show the different levels of impact in the various Caribbean countries at this point?
I have seen various studies from various countries in the Caribbean, and it's measured in different ways. You see, the thing about Sahara dust, it's not uniform. It's quite heterogeneous in its distribution, and it's sporadic occurrence when it does happen. So exposures are different. There's also the contribution of local sources, and it's from a science point of view, it's very difficult to separate the effects from locally generated PM 2.5 or from Saharan dust 2.5. Those because it's the same fraction. So isolating the air quality impacts based on each particular agent is very difficult. So what we have is studies that are generally saying when the dust levels are this, regardless of where it's coming from. If the dust level are this, X, Y, Z, these are the possible consequences.
Thank you.
So one of the things that was interesting and surprising to me too was that you mentioned that the Sahara dust was impacted hurricanes, right? Are there specific hurricanes that we know on record that was impacted, or is that just a sort of generalization?
It is a generalization, and it's just correlating two data sets. The aerosol optical depth from the satellite imagery, that will gauge what particulate loadings are at different times, and the general tracks of where hurricanes go, and if there was a relationship with that. And the general trend seemed to have been from that analysis was that the hurricanes tend to veer north when there were high particulate loadings.
Let me see. Okay. So veering north would mean it would hit North America.
It had a higher tendency of doing that.
Yeah, okay. All right. Are there other questions?
Just one important comment in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, pollution from the oil industry. Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess what comes to mind immediately about that is that two things. One, the new administration pulled us out of WHO and pulled us out of the Paris Accords. So there you go. So there is not going to be much incentive, at least for the next few years, for oil industry and stuff to self-regulate.
What then is the advocacy for our region? What then is the advocacy for our region?
We have to be the advocates. We can't, yeah, as so many in so many other things.
Yes, ma'am.
We have to be the ones. Okay, other comments, questions?
I have a question. My daughter, when she studied in Mexico, was diagnosed with asthma, and she thought she had it before, but since then she's had quite a problem, and she says she knows when she's going to get a migraine from looking at the weather, the darkness of the sky. And it just occurred to me, maybe it's not just regular clouds, but it might be Sahara dust clouds that is contributing to her increased migraine or her incidences of migraine. What do you think? Has that been shown as one of the effects?
PM on the whole, wherever PM levels are high, it would look darker, of course, because it would block light. People who have the tendency to have allergies would mean that any PM you inhale, regardless of where it's coming from, if it's coming from erosion products or wafted in from Saharan dust, or if it's coming from combustion of diesel engines, particulates of a certain size being inhaled and then being deposited on your gas exchange organ is going to interfere with your gas exchange and can trigger allergic reaction and allergic responses by the body. That includes clogging of your sinuses, which can induce headaches.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm very keen on surveillance in terms of epidemiology. And I'm hoping that Dr. Archer's both ears are tuned to the discussion, because I can see teams of students going out and sort of compiling the data that's happening in and around our campus. I do recall that USC was impacted, Dr. Archer, you confirm, by the Sahara dust. And it is a matter of incorporating it into student activity and having the data, go all the way up to the advocacy organizations. so that we on the ground, we're actually giving real-time data of the impact. All those hospitalizations or what have you, the increase in pharmaceuticals, all of this data can help us to sort of strengthen the cause for some improvement. Dr. Arjo?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Although I see the greater impact for areas beyond where we are, I think in a way, and I haven't seen the data for the entire island, but normally the central part of Trinidad, the open areas, are likely to be much more affected than where we are up in the Maracas Hills.
Yeah.
We're protected by a lot of forested area and so on. So that would be good information, looking at it from a national point of view. But the impact, I think, would be significantly greater, and those students can participate in trying to help assess what the impact is on the other regions. And I'm speaking more from a biological point of view than an expert here in this particular area. But I don't know what Dr. Baboolal thinks. And just one other thought, I don't know, who are the students who work with you, or do you have a quarter of your students, and whether graduate students or undergrad students who work with you on developing any research in that area?
Right now, I do not have any research students working on Sahara dust. We're looking at it from a taught perspective, from a theoretical perspective, to look at it as a natural pollutant and what can be done. And then looking at other pollutants, because there are many sources of pollutants. Sahara dust is simply one of them, and one of them that we have very little control over. So it's been quantified, and the regulatory agencies generally monitor. And it has been a subject of a lot of research for the last 20, 30 years, particulates and what they can do and how they affect human bodies. But particulates often, because of their size, determines their biological activity, and secondly, their chemical composition. So there are smaller bits of research, but it's a more or less mature field, because we more or less know what the effects are, what the consequences are. The WHO has numerous guidelines, and they have designated particulates as a carcinogen that needs to be monitored, and it is because exposure to particulates, because it's a carrier for different chemicals into your system, depending on its size, can induce cancer. So there is definitive evidence to show cause and effect. It's no longer just associations, but they already have enough data to know that this exposure causes this effect.
And the solutions from your perspective, Dr. Baboolal, in terms of individual, not even the population, but the individual, what does one do? I've heard you mention, all the asthma and everything. Is it just palliative?
It is additive, and I would say the individual has to take care. So my advice to anyone is be aware of your environment, and if you care about your lungs, then think about what you're putting there. Just like if you care about your body, care about what you eat, care about what you breathe. You have very little control over the ambient air, but you may have control over what you inhale by wearing a mask if you don't like what it's outside, by not smoking, by not exercising near roadways, by if you can, don't try not to drive behind diesel trucks and smoking vehicles. It's obvious, you can see the smoke coming off of it. If you know you are susceptible, then try to stay indoors as much as possible, where you have more control over the indoor air quality. So those are what I would say. And listen to your guidelines from the ministries, from the regulatory agencies who have advisories, put out regular advisories on what the dust is.
I think
I almost said, go ahead, please.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I almost envision a neon sign that has the alert, the current dust levels. I mean, I get on my phone so much information, correct, that tells me the air quality, the everything. And I wish, for example, as folk, and it takes me back into Maracas Valley, as I'm passing the university, I can probably have the update as to the air quality, what have you. And so just to keep, for me, it's health promotion, just to keep that awareness that you should be thinking about the air that you're breathing. You're going up to a concert and you see that reminder, and you may hold back from a diesel truck just because, that because you've seen something. So these are just some ideas that I'm thinking in terms of being on the ground and what we can do as individuals.
Yeah, I think
Dr.
I like that idea that you followed up because Hema was saying that phrase, care about what you breed. That could be turned into like a really good marketing, right? Care about what you breed.
About what you breathe.
Yep.
Yep.
I think that's actually a good place for us to stop today.
Absolutely.
Care about what you breed.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it.
All right. Any
You
last
don't have to
words?
go with the hackneyed.
Yes,
do not smoke.
Any
Dr.
last
Murray,
words? Okay.
can we use that phrase in our campaign of what we're doing in Benton Harbor with our A for Asthma program? Because I agree
let's
with
ask,
all of you. What a wonderful phrase.
let's ask Dr. Baboolal. Can we
Oh.
use your phrase?
It's not patented. Send me a t-shirt.
All right.
I will. Oh, you know what?
Princess will turn it into a t-shirt by
Yes.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a machine at the office.
Yep.
Bye, pick it up.
Yes,
Care
wonderful.
about what you breed. Thank
Well,
you so very
let
much.
me first jump ahead of Dr. Murray and thank you so much,
Yep.
Dr. Baboolal, for being
You're
with us,
welcome.
for holding our hands across the seas and across the dust, from Africa to us with love. I think that it is not only the reduction of the desert, but also the engagement of the water, that catchment of water on the green wall that really inspires me. So sometimes things are happening that we call natural, and we can harness them. They don't always have to harm us. But if we can harness that for electricity, for so much else, for watering our herds of cattle as they migrate around Africa, we can probably do that also in the Caribbean. So thank you so much very personally, and thank you from Environmental Fridays. And Dr. Murray, please.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming in today. Thank you, Bridget, for being a co-host, a very active co-host here. Totally enjoyed. And Dr. Hema Baboolal, great information, gives us solutions on an individual level, which is what Environmental Fridays tagline is. Environmental Fridays, it is personal. It is personal. So thank you all very much. We will stay in touch. And if it's Friday, it's Environmental Fridays. And we'll see you next week, which is the beginning of a new month already in 2025. Take
And
care.
Dr. Murray, thank you for the opportunity. I've put the Charlotte Education Services Consortium in the chat.
All right, good.
And I welcome you to explore.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.